Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Sirius Report. Well, Paul, there's an interesting transition that's taking shape in China as they prepare to move away from their longstanding policies of producing lower to medium level commercial products to the world, and at the same time are ready to lead the way in high level technological trade.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's really accelerating this, and is a big important point to make, is the behavior of the United States. In the sense that, particularly the advent of Trump 2.0, that all these tariff policies, all these threats, ongoing threats of sanctions and weaponizing the dollar, has actually encouraged nations to work with the Chinese in technological developments, to embrace Chinese technological developments, and also to, in essence, encourage the Chinese themselves to make those technological developments. I mean, we've talked about semiconductors before, but that's a great example also in terms of developing their own lithography machines. If the United States had never tried to squeeze China, tried to crush Huawei out of existence, uh, I don't think China would have made the developments they have. They would have gone, well, there's a plentiful supply of chips. We don't regard it as being a threat to our national security. So what's the problem? Now they know it's a problem, and as far as they're concerned, they can't trust the United States. So, it's the old saying that necessity is the mother of invention. So they went ahead and made those developments. And also, of course, and it's something I discussed on my own podcasts a decade ago when China was still the breadbasket, so to speak, for manufacturing cheap goods and selling them to the world, that China was going to go through this huge change in terms of its economy, where it would become more consumption based, but also wanted to produce high tech uh, uh, developments with modern technology. And also, it wanted to embrace, whether you agree with the so called Green Revolution in inverted commas, we're no fans of it, but they've embraced it, and they're taking dominant positions in terms of the electric vehicle market, but also in terms of solar and wind. And the advancements they're making, it completely contradicts the age-old statement that's always come out that China steals all technology. And at some point, yeah, they did. They stole everything, and maybe just didn't even develop it, just took the technology and rolled it out as their own. But they don't do that anymore because they're technological leaders in so many fields now. And this has come about because they had no choice but to do this because of the United States' threatening posture with regards to the dollar, with regards to trying to crush China, companies like Huawei, etc. But when you look at it now, China's leading in so many what are termed emerging technologies. So, for example, batteries, electric batteries, there's advanced radio frequency communications, so-called capacitors even, solar panels, drones, robotics, high-speed rail systems, even things like challenging in terms of quantum computing now, and all the developments that we've spoken about previously on podcasts that we've put out on YouTube. And China now leads probably, and there's admission in the West about this, around about 90% of critical technology research. And that's all come about in a very, very short space of time, and it's completely caught the West flat-footed. There was particularly the United States, because it's extended its lead over the United States correspondingly. And if you go back, say, 20 years ago, China led in perhaps 5% of technologies. Now it leads, as we said, in 90% of technologies. And it's achieving leadership in things like high performance computing, advanced integrated circuit design, semiconductor fabrication, things that the West and the United States assumed they would have a dominant position for decades to come, and we could squeeze China out of existence in terms of its technological development, and it's completely failed. And China does put its money where its mouth is and is invested hugely, and also changed its whole education system so it is more geared around STEM, so science, technology, engineering, and maths. And it's irrefutably the case that they're making that transition. And when people talk about China's, moving business sectors to places like Vietnam, that is the old bread and butter technology or bread and butter developments they've made in terms of selling cheap products to the West, toasters, kettles, that kind of thing. And therefore China hasn't lost out because they're still profiting from that sector, but they're moving operations, not least because then the United States thinks they're buying made in Vietnam goods and not Chinese goods, but they are indirectly. But also to make way for the fact that China's embracing this enormous technological revolution and is increasingly leading across the board in multiple technologies and in a very, very, very short space of time. I mean, and as I said, when you have the Western media even admitting on a frequent basis, that China leads in things like 37 of 44 major areas. I mean, and this is everything. Hypersonics is another one, and they're rapidly catching up in things where previously everyone thought the United States was like years ahead in quantum computing. They no longer are, but absolutely and irrefutably, China will continue to make advancements, and the West is in no position to challenge that. The West could find a place to work with the Chinese, but there's absolutely a concern that not only is China going to lead technologically in areas, but they would actually could establish monopolies in aspects of manufacturing, even in aspects of power generation in the future, in one of these termed nanoscale materials, even things like synthetic biology, they've talked about it. And, therefore the West has to take this seriously and stop pretending that China just sits there and steals all the technology, as of course they absolutely once did. But they don't do anymore, and they're prepared to put enormous amounts of money to invest into research and development. And there is absolutely clear evidence from all the scientific papers that come out that China's just, they've got the so-called bit between their teeth, and it's going to position itself probably in the foreseeable future as the world's leading science and technology, what you might term superpower, because of having such enormous amounts of investment in research and development across all these new critical and emerging technologies. And, as I said, we've discussed some of this previously, but it's also worth noting if you look at technology trackers in terms of all the world's top 10 leading research institutions, well, they're based in China and they generate 9 times or even 10 times more research papers than the second ranked country, which is usually the United States, but not in all technology. Sometimes there are other countries. And of course, what's also not helped the United States is because they've had this really bitter, twisted attitude towards China. A lot of Chinese people who were major technology developers in the United States have all gone home in the last 5, even 10 years. And that has significantly dented the US's capabilities and massively increased China's capabilities in the process.
One of the more interesting things is, what exactly is stealing intellectual property. Because if you think about it, let's go back a few thousand years when China was the one, and they've been documented as it, as inventing gunpowder, or at least the formula for gunpowder. Well, do you think in the 15th century, 16th century, when the Ottoman Empire, the Muslim world, Europe was using gunpowder to fire their cannons in warfare, or for later, a few years, centuries later, for firearms, that they were giving a royalty to China for all the gunpowder that they used? Or let's move forward to the Great Britain, the UK. It was believed that the modern day steel manufacturing, the Bessemer process, was created in the UK. Well, that same process is used pretty much around the world. Do they pay a royalty to the inventor for that process in creating steel? No. A lot of technology is simply something that was created, that was passed around, and nobody worries about stealing it as IP. Now, Mao Zedong, in his one of his works back in the day, said this: at one stage, it is necessary to copy from foreign countries. After a period of imitation, there should be no more copying. Students learn by copying their teachers in school, but after graduating, they become the teachers themselves. And I think this is vastly important because you made the point, and there's no denying it. China, when it was in its emerging infancy, had to copy modernity from nearly every other country, especially the Western developed countries. Now, all of a sudden, since probably about the 2010s, moving forward, more and more and more and more, China is the one who's doing the innovation, and the rest of the world is either trying to imitate or catch up. Russia and China, and probably Iran to some extent, have hypersonics. Well, President Trump a month ago made a declaration that Russia stole hypersonic technology from us. The US didn't even have hypersonic technology. So we're suddenly seeing that transition of the innovation, and the high level technology is being done by China, Russia, and elsewhere, and not by Europe, the United States. And I think this is important because we're getting closer to October, and annually the Chinese government has a plenum where they discuss what the new policies and direction they're going to move forward to. And in October in Beijing, they are focusing on retiring the old economic model that was highly dependent upon low cost exports, construction, and real estate, and move towards high tech, innovation driven development.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is something, I've spoken about this for a long time, that this was happening, and we've listed things over the years and these developments in the West completely fell asleep at the wheel. I mean, I contacted governments as usual in the West and go, you are aware of this. You do know China's making huge strides forward across dozens of technology sectors. I mean, not just obvious ones, but also, I mean, robotics is another one, nuclear power, machine tools as well. Even I mean, apart from things like whatever people think about pharmaceutical industry, which is a bit contentious, but chemical sector, biotechnology, the list goes on and on. And they are just making massive strides forward. And it's rather like China can build a bridge in a year. The West takes about 5 years to decide if they even want to build the bridge. Then another 5 years planning it, another 5 or 10 years to build it. China's just advances far faster than the Western because when they want something done, it happens. There's no kind of waiting around for someone somewhere to make a decision. Decisions are made. People are told to get on with it and make these developments. That's why they have the capability to also encourage students to graduate with STEM degrees. And as you said, that the pupils become the teachers. And also they make the environment really, really profitable and for research and development in terms of credit, in terms of taxation, in terms of labor costs, and in terms of obviously investment credits for machinery, capital equipment, and all the establishment of research institutes that focuses on key industries, technologies. And and that's the big failing of the West. And we've rested on our laurels. And Germany's a great example where it was a technology and industrial leader for so long. And it just sat still and didn't realize it had to move with the times. It hasn't moved with the times, and now it's suffering, and not just exclusively that. There's a whole bunch of problems, not least a lack of access to cheap energy. But only the most ignorant person could now seriously suggest that China isn't a technology leader, and in many diverse areas, well, in areas that people said, well, China's finished in those areas. China, in fact, or China might not be finished, but it's going to take 20, 30, 40 years for them to be able to get anywhere near where we are. And by then, we'll have moved on another 4 or 5 iterations. But when you look at it as well, is that not only has China been able to respond technologically in terms of developments, but they're also able to hurt the United States, and we've said this before, by restricting rare earth metals being shipped for military use. Remember last December, China banned the export of antimony, gallium, and germanium, as well as what are called super hard materials to the US. And this all came about because the US tried to derail China's developments in AI and chip making. I mean, and China went, okay, well, if that's your idea, we're going to pursue you and hurt you in ways that really will hurt you. And you've not hurt us. You may have slowed down some of our development, but rapidly we're going to be able to develop our own chipsets that are comparable to the ones that you currently produce. And in other ways, we'll find a workaround for things that in the past may have, been something that was a big impediment to us, but no longer is. And we talked about recently about China developing alternatives to the silicon chip. Recall that, and that obviously a lot of people were interested in this indium selenide. We're not going to repeat that. If you want to listen to that, go and find it on our YouTube channel. So you get the clear understanding from what we're saying of these immense challenges that China faced in terms of being able to say we want to completely have a U-turn in terms of what our economy stands for technologically, what our economy needs, and also what we can develop for export in the future. And like everything, they have these long-term plans, and this is why I became aware of it quite a few years ago, because we found that China was starting to massively fund higher education. They provided incentives for private innovation, and they were building a lot of infrastructure to support huge technological advancements so they could enable China's industrial sector to become more productive, and also, of course, not rely anymore on very labor intensive production or production using old technology. So it was all out there. We discovered it. We were aware of it. We used to comment on when Xi Jinping made visits to provinces in China, why he was doing it. And it was all to do with new technologies, new factories. And, and the other thing, of course, is they even had third plenum even a year ago that looked at focusing on what they termed the promotion of revolutionary technological breakthroughs, innovative allocation of productive forces, and in-depth industrial transformation, upgrading of industry. So again, There's a lot of interesting stuff. For a lot of people, this is boring and uninteresting. But if you really want to know what's going on in the world, it's not boring. It's actually extremely interesting because then we get to understand what China's doing. And it's incredible that there's people like us who were aware of this. And yet Western governments had no idea what was going on because in their arrogance, ignorance and stupidity, they didn't think it was possible. But it is, and China's made these enormous strides forward.
Absolutely. I want to go ahead and end this on an interesting analysis that I stumbled across just a couple days ago. This is from an economist and historian from Columbia University. Xi has so many reasons to be grateful to Trump. The two most transcending ones affect the full world neighborhood. First, Trump is ceding the great game in the global south to China. The destruction of U.S. aid, well, that's relative, and Trump's tariff war, which is pertinent, on the world's poorest countries in Africa and Latin America are pushing those continents closer to China. The world's future is being written in China, and Trump is its unwitting co-author. Paul, was there any other
No, I
comments you
think
wanted to add to
that's a
this?
great point to finish on. It's absolutely the case. The US has sowed the seeds of its own destruction through its arrogance, ignorance, and frankly stupidity. It could have embraced the world and spent trillions of dollars on technological innovation instead of spending trillions of dollars on pointless wars, pointless regime change, pointless attempts to try and screw the rest of the world over who weren't playing ball. And also, of course, instead of embracing technological revolution, they embraced idiotic financialization, which is nothing to do with technological innovation. It's all to do with making bogus profits by inflating assets that aren't worth a fraction of what they are perceived to be. And that is for me, is a crying shame. Because if the US had focused, can you imagine what it could have been capable of doing? Yeah, I mean,
Absolutely.
it's limitless. And they screwed up, and now they're going to pay a huge price for that idiotic behavior.
Indeed. Well, Paul, thank you as always for your analysis and insight regarding
Yes,
this.
likewise.
And to everybody here at the Sirius Report community, thank you as always for your support. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, comment, send this out to anybody you think it might be important to. And until the next time we get together, have a great day.